So hi, I'm Jussi Harvela, and sorry to say I'm a little bit under flu. I came with the temperature last night, so probably a little bit slow today. How much time do we have?
It's like hour and a half.
Okay. All right, but anyway, so my background, I'm a co-founder and general partner with Veturi Venture Accelerator, but my background comes from business-to-business ICT sales all my life. So for those who are making B2C stuff, we can try to discuss, and I know something about that, but my core is selling B2B, especially software and hardware related products. And I used to run a company called Solid Information Technology. Solid was a database company, distributed data management. Business model was OEM. We sold the company to IBM in 2007. During that venue or tenure, I raised, I think it was 84 million of funding in euros in 5 rounds. Moved the company in 98 to Silicon Valley, operated from there about 10 years. We raised still and yet the biggest Finnish VC round ever, 55 million euros in 2000 September, coming from international sources. So basically we had Apex Partners, Bank Boston Capital, Intel Capital and so forth as our lead investors. Conventum was our Finnish lead investor in participating. I already was operating out of Silicon Valley at that time point, and we raised the first 5 million euros in 98 to move the operation there. And the whole management team practically was operating out. So with the 55 million round we raised, we grew the company from 43 people to about 200 people in 11 months, worldwide in 17 different locations. And bulk of the hiring came from setting up a direct sales force which operated in 70 different locations in 4 of 5 continents. So we had Mountain View, Boston, Munich, Stockholm, Tokyo, and later Beijing, where we operated. But anyway, my profile, sort of to give you a background on this thing, is that my profile is I'm usually the guy who goes in and makes the first deal, whether it's getting VC funding or whether you make a commercial deal or if you do hiring or things like that. I'm the sort of the business development type of a sales guy. And you need to be pretty quick on your feet and make pretty bold decisions because you might need to sort of restructure the product on the fly there in front of the customer. So, and then not get fired or not get killed. With Solid, I was not a founder. I was number 5 who came in. I was the business developer who started to sort of visiting customers to make a sort of international product. But typically, you have to have one of the founders who is capable of standing in front of the customers. And basically, otherwise, in business-to-business sales, it might be really tough. We go into more details on that. But like Juha said, customer is the number 1. In any kind of a business what we do. And I always show a couple of slides anytime I present here in Finland, and one which typically Finnish companies, they are technology companies, they never productize their product. and people don't think their company as a business. And do you guys, what's the definition of business for you guys? What is a business?
It's a machine which making money.
Yeah, you make more money than you lose. So that's the basic principle on whichever you operate. So eyeballs and whatever, they are nice, but I think they are bullshit at the very end. And there's been sort of a lot of stuff, a lot of Web 2.0 type of approaches lately over the past 5 or 10 years, and where people have been focusing on getting just a lot of eyeballs. And it works, but only for very few. The more safe route to success is by having a B2B type of a agenda, or B2B to C agenda where you are using a distribution channel. But any of these things, there's some business-to-business sales aspects which apply. And also, if we are dealing with B2C, the key to success is that you have to know your customer. You can't buy it with a consultant who comes and makes a sort of a market study. You have to know your customer intimately. And throughout whatever business you are executing, you just have to live with the customer. I don't see any other way to do that. And I haven't seen any other way people are able to do it. You might be a lucky bastard and be able to sort of hit a home run, but typically it takes a lot of travel time. It takes a lot of being, a lot of understanding, a lot of asking questions. So selling is not pitching. Selling is asking questions and listening and understanding if there's a need. And if you find a need, customer need, you need to create value. Typically, you need to operate with some sort of a revenue. You need to have a growing revenues, because companies which have growing revenues, they tend to get better valuations than the ones which are losing revenue. Profit. Essentially, yeah, I've probably done the biggest loss in the history of the Finnish startup scene. So I had a planned loss of 31 million euros in 2001. But that was a plan.
1 year?
1 year, 31 million. So we hired roughly about 40 sales people, so I'll explain how the sales organization looks like, but used the headhunters, used a lot of things to structure. But we ramped up our revenues from about 7 million to about 18 million in 1 year, and during which we lost 31 million money doing that. So P&L was red, 31 million. So profit is good. You can make a planned loss, but you have to have some sort of a visibility when you are turning profitable. And at least you have to be able to convince people. If you're sort of keep going with red, the game is over. At least you have lost your valuation, what you have created so far. Cost structure, similar thing. Remember, you have to watch your costs. One of the paradoxes is that every time you close funding, after the funding, the company operates really poorly. And when the company is very shallow with cash, it operates beautifully. Every time after funding, people start thinking about business development and branding and logos and advertising and PR, all this stuff. We did so as well with Solid. In 2001, we used 2.5 million, 1.5 million just for PR activities, just for PR, just creating PR. Well, retrospective, I think it was really dumb. We, for example, hired a PR agent to design, to ask whether the question was that his company's name and the product name Solid, good or bad. We paid 400 grand for the guys south of Golden Gate. I don't remember what's the name of the guys. The same guys who did, for example, Pentium name, and who did the, for Toyota, they did, what's the car brand? The Lexus, yeah, they did those and things like that. So they spent 400 grand, we spent 400 grand on those guys, and they basically came back with a 20-page presentation where they said that Solid is a beautiful name, they changed the typeface a little bit, and they put a period at the end. So I'm an engineer in my background, and I just went, yes, this is really worth it. But good companies don't need that type of branding. More important branding is how your customers value you, how your investors, how your peers, how people value you, who are you working with, rather than a sort of how the PR agents are thinking. So sensible cost structure, you have to maintain it because it's very critical. You get a lot of bonus points from VCs, from your board, whoever, if you are able to forecast your cost margin or cost structure in the right manner. And use common sense, whatever you do, guys. This is no rocket science whatsoever. Typically, the guys who are less educated, who are dropouts, they are business savvy. They think that you have to make more money than lose. And it's common sense. There's nothing, no rocket science here. Everybody can do it. You just have to want it bad enough, and you have to want to so much that you're able to take advice from multiple people and make decisions based on that. And then very important, fail fast and fail often, which means that if you have to try things, a lot of different things before you find the right formula. You have to go and do it quickly, but also decide very quickly whether you did something wrong or right. And then you have to make another decision. So it's just like my partner Moafak typically talks about motorboating and sailing. I don't know if you use that type of one. Basically, it's similar to sailing. You have to adapt to the market conditions. And it's very important to make decisions. If you don't make decisions, you die. And if you make a wrong decision, you don't die because you can make a new good decision afterwards. Yeah, effective use of internet. That's no brainer. The other slide which I want to show you is sort of a setting the stage. You're in business. If you're a software company, for example, you have a couple of million in revenue. People think they've made it. And if you go to the real world, Silicon Valley or wherever, proof of concept is when you turn about $1 million. Then you're starting your market penetration with one product if you're getting to about 10 million, 5 to 10 million size. With 10 million, I guess you are right now about roughly 50th biggest Finnish software company. Rapid growth starts from 10 to 50 million when you actually can scale. 10 million in revenues, you are about 100 people in size. If you are in investment funds, you're 150 people in size. Then you can actually deploy worldwide and take the product in multiple directions. Have a sales force and push it out. 50 million, another milestone. Then there's sort of the rapid growth, where you're growing, multiple X's a year, might end. Then you enter into the growth mode, where you're still growing, 50, 60, 70% a year. And at that time point, you have probably 350, 400 people in the payroll. And the next step is, if you are 50 million, you are probably close to top 10 in Finland in software companies. And then actual business sort of starts from $250,000 revenues, annual revenues. So for example, FSEC here, I think they are about 125 right now. So they are at the growth phase. So they should be growing roughly about 40 to 50% if it were a US-driven VC-backed company. But I think it's important to sort of conceptualize and if you think about it, how can this be done? So right now, Skype, I think in 5 years, I guess Skype went from 0 to 500 million revenues. We don't have anybody in Finland who's done it. MySQL did a great exit, but their revenues were about 50 million US dollars. So the perception, the marketing is not the revenues. And hey, interrupt, ask questions, object, whatever, anytime. So, and now I guess we are getting more into agenda. I thought I would say a couple of words here just to remind me of what sort of explanations of the terminology. Business development, so that's a word which is used in very different ways in different cultures, and especially when you're dealing with somebody like Nokia, everybody seems to be business developers, and then everybody outside agrees that they are doing nothing whatsoever. They are trying to figure out the concepts. Business development is for startup businesses is one of the most crucial things in early phase. When you have about 5 employees, typically you don't have a product marketing, you don't have marketing of anything, you don't really have a sales guy. You have to have somebody who understands the technology and who understands the customer problem and is able to converse with the customers, trying to see if there's a repeatable problem with these customers. And basically, it's one of the core jobs in the whole company. If you start building a business, if you're starting to generate revenues. So you have to understand the customer needs. Very often you have to sell what you don't have. And if you have a sales guy who goes out, for example, if I had a sales guy who went out and sold something we don't have and we can't deliver, there's no way to other than fire the guy immediately, because you have to understand also the fact that whether you can deliver or not. If you can't deliver whatever you promised, then you don't have credibility with your customers. So very important. Typically, a good founding team, there's a CTO type of person, tech savvy who can discuss with people, and there's somebody else who discusses money aspects. And those need to work very close hand by hand as a team. So that sales, the guy who talks money doesn't overpromise, and the guy who understands the tech, he can once again talk money because he loses his credibility. Everybody who talks money usually are not credible in front of customers, especially in the early phase. So you have to team it up in many cases. Product, actually I'm probably missing here one concept is that the next one I would put here is customer, differentiate between customer and market. So I'm using a lot of word customer because I think that when you are in early phase of the development of the company, only if you're working B2C can you understand the market, or you should be able to understand the market, because when you're doing business-to-business sales, you need to talk with individual customers, and after you talk with 10, you don't still touch the whole market. You have to talk with 100, and you might start touch the market. And if you talk with 1,000 customers, then you can start understanding how the market dynamics actually work. But my gut feel is, and my sort of actually firm belief, and based also what I learned in Silicon Valley by watching people do this startup scene there, is that you have to talk personally as a founder or as a founding team member with as many customers as possible to understand if there's a value problem with your technology, if there's a way how to make it. And basically, if you're doing B2C, that's a little bit trickier because B2C consumer behavior is very different. You have to find a formula where there's some type of a need, a generic need for the big masses, somewhere in the Gaussian distribution. For example, I can't judge if you pitch me a product because I'm sitting typically at one of the other ends. So I don't represent the typical, in Finland we have this area, Konala. There's a sort of a single parent lady sitting in Konala. If you want to sell something to B2C, you have to be able to address her needs. And that's not, that's not me. I don't understand personally. With business to business, it's easier because you can go and talk with businesses. You can talk with influencers and understand if there's a need. You can sort of portray or mirror your technology to people. Some of them will buy it. They will say, hey, this sounds interesting, but you should package it like this, or you should add these and these and these features. That's actually what the product marketing does then. When you get to that stage, is that basically there's a document in many companies called MRD, Market Requirements Definition, which is actually a business plan for a single product, where you identify the need, the demand, you characterize it, create a feature set which matches, and then you schedule it on a roadmap that how you sequence it step by step until you have a sort of entry-level product and then a full-fledged product which goes in. Product to me is something which early stages of the companies they should not have. You claim that you have a product, but typically when you're selling to B2C, you should be selling customized story for each customer. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean that you have to actually customize it. You have to study your customer well. You have to understand what is their problem. Is there a business problem? Do they have a business problem in which they can value their money? And then you have to satisfy them. Because getting the first customer is always damn tricky. Because typically any smart customer will ask a reference. They will ask that who else has bought this? And if you don't have anybody, so how are you going to make a deal? Typically you find somebody, books tell you about this stuff, but it's actually how it happens in the real world. You find somebody who's an early adopter, typically in the mid-management or higher management, who wants to make a career move forward. He's technically educated, and they've identified the problem, and they actually specs the product for you. So typically your customer will tell you what they need, and then you develop a similar type of a product which you try to generalize. And that product is basically, the customer there, I'm using a name called lead customer for that. So not a pilot customer, but a lead customer. Somebody you have a strategic relationship, who's usually the first customer, second customer, but who helps you to develop the actual product. And product you have, once you have repeatable sales. So you have the same stuff, which you have used sort of similarly each time, and you are able to sort of sell it as it is to multiple customers. And with the product, you probably, have you had a sort of a discussion about what's the augmented product and whole product and technology product?
A little bit of the whole product.
So, yeah, so read the Jeffrey Moore's books, and it's excellent, explaining that you have the, for example, the software, you have a sort of the actual tech stuff. Then you have different services which are layered there. You have the whole concept, the pricing, whole go-to-market channel mix, how you sort of go to market, which sort of channels, is it direct sales, or you only go with partners and so forth. The whole thing, whole package is called product. And once you can do that, repeat the same stuff all over and over again, then you are getting somewhere. Yep.
I think you could elaborate that a little bit. That's the difference between, for example, the US approach and the Finnish approach. For us, the product is always something concrete, like something. Actual tech is the product, whereas, like you explained in the US, it's the very comprehensive approach.
Yeah, it's everything, including how you deploy your sales force, whether you go with the VP or CEO first, or whether it's a sales account manager who dials in and calls first. So the whole concept, what the company does, if it's a single-purpose company, that's part in early phases. So you have to have a support services. First you have a sort of something you license typically, or something you sell as a service. The second thing is that you have to think, in order to deploy to customer, first, in order to how you deploy it to the customer, you have to figure out what is the method, whether it's a direct sales or channel sales, and then once you take the actual product to the customer so they can start using it, whether there's a professional services required, meaning consultation, do you have a consulting packages, and how is the after sales, do you have a sort of renewals of things, do you give guarantees and so forth. There's a whole lot of things dealing with the business model and pricing. And then you extend it all the way to, partners, whether you use partners to sort of support once you've done the sales, or during the sales, or during the implementation. So all of that is what's called product. And once you are able to repeat that multiple times, then you can hire a sales guy. I think this is very important. But before that, you don't have a repeatable sales. You don't have a need for a sales guy. Even the volumes might be high what you are dealing with. And typically, it's very interesting. Sort of a jumping back and forth is that if you are making sales to a customer, in the US there's a rule of direct sales that you can't make a direct sales deal if the customer potential is not more than 50K for the initial deal. So it can be spread over a couple of years' time, but basically the one account, one deal you are making, cost of sales will be so huge that you can't make direct sales without the price tag being 50K or higher. In Finland it might be a little bit less, or maybe 35 or 40K, because sales guys are cheaper. But basically everything under that 50K is typically either phone sales, telesales, or web sales, or some other channel type of sales, but not a direct sales cost. But early when you have 5 people in your startup, you have to go and because you want to listen to the customer. I always use the word, I want to see the eyeballs move. So I have to go and visit the customer, no matter how much, if it's 100 euros, or if it's 400 euros, or if it's 1,000 euros, or whatever. But that way I learn. Each time I go and talk with the customer, I ask a lot of questions, I understand their business, and I understand why they are interested, and also understand how much budget they have. So if I say, like early phases of Solid, we started with the price point of $99 for a sort of a single server database. Next year we sold the same stuff $43,000. Exactly the same source. But it was just, you know, asking the customers. I probably had about 400 customer visits during the year. Yeah.
This is actually one of the key problems we have been doing with Deal Machine is that you know, pricing, and can you change pricing when you publish the initial pricing? And my take was that you can change it how much you want, but then you have to just.
So it depends what you are selling, because you can change the product.
Yeah.
And each time you change the product, you can change whatever you want.
Yeah.
But if you do it too often, then what happens is that your message gets diluted and nobody takes you serious.
Yeah.
But it's tough. Once again, it depends on the volume expectation you have, and if you're selling, like I understand you guys are doing, sort of you do channel sales or internet sales, correct me if I'm wrong, with a relatively low price point. So you need to have a lot of volume.
Yeah.
So it's a marketing game, in a sense, or some other way to distribute things. When I'm, for example, right now dealing with one of our portfolio companies, Sensei, and we are doing some early NRE deals where we let our customers, potential customers, to try out. You know, we sell one copy of something which they maybe demo internally. So the price point there is about 100K plus minus 2, and it's not really a product for them. And the real deal what we are doing with our customers is 7 figures or up. So in that case, it's a different process. But you have to set up a price point, and then you have to carry it. And you have to just make sure that the volume, there's enough volume. So you have to modify the product if you want to change them. Yo, Risto.
I think one big question that at least we face, and I guess a lot of the other startup teams face here, that I totally agree in everything with this, and now what we think is that how much effort we should put on talking to customers in Finland and how much in San Francisco where we are aiming. So that's something that we do B2B sales.
It's gladly world that has gotten smaller. 10 years ago, I would have sort of told you that you've got to be there in San Francisco, wherever your target market is. But we have another portfolio company right now. Our lead customer is in Jakarta. So guess what we are doing? So we are spending a lot of customer time there to understand the ecosystem, understand how it's working. But right now, it's easier today to understand behavior or way. People are more global. The younger the people, the more global they are. And if you look at the 15, 20-year-olds today, you know, I'm already 46 or 45 or whatever, so I'm aging old. But the cultures are so much more similar in buying behavior because of the, you know, the whole web phenomena has brought people closer. And you know, my kids, they are native Finns, but they are English speaking since they lived there like 10 years old. I got you know, a couple of teenagers at home, but they are discussing with their friends with Skype and whatever chats and Facebooks worldwide, anywhere, and they have exactly the same fads, same bands, same buying behavior everywhere around the world. So it depends very much what you're doing. If I were selling directly and I had maybe 50 potential customers worldwide, you know, there would be a lot of travel to understand what is the customer like.
So I think the main question is that for us it's mostly event organizing companies, event organizers. So I think the question that we have to figure out, are they different? Is the market different here than in the US? We don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I can tell it off the bat here.
It's the activity organizer.
Yeah, the scale of things is different, and activity level is different, and people's interests and venues are different, and all. You know. Cultures are different, but it depends very much which category. But typically, you have to go and talk with customers. Otherwise, I don't believe that you can build a business. Or then you are a very lucky bastard. You sort of hold thing like this, and something just happens, but that's why it's building.
We discussed the same thing yesterday, and I said that if you have 5,000 euros to spend, I'd rather spend it in a major trade show if you target industry than some Gartner report, for example. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, last year I was in a CES Consumer Electronics Show in January in Las Vegas, and we had just, Mofak and I, we had other Veturi partners, we had just reviewed about 800 deals here in Finland during the year, out of which about half of them were somehow related to consumer electronics, you know, little gadgets or things like that. Especially in the Oulu area, there's a lot of that stuff going on. Everybody seems to want to build their own phone there for some reason. But almost, yeah. But anyway, it was interesting. We just walked through a Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and China halls, which were, you know, 3 buildings, about, I'd say 10 times about size of this room. Small booths. And we saw, for some of the deals, we saw like 20 different competition. We're out there on the market, but people were sort of trying to figure out what is the business model or how should they package. Just saying that, hey, come on, instead of using this tuli money into all these, you know, 5K things, just give the money to guys and, you know, go and see it yourself. Because the competition is so huge. But sitting here, you don't understand. If you go to one of these things, of course, then you end up in a question whether your product is better or whether you address the market needs better. You can actually take it to the market better than anybody else. Quickly through strategic marketing. Hopefully, one of the founders knows what that is, because that's very, very important. You can also buy it. Selling and setting up the strategic product direction. Typically, that's actually CTO's role. In my book, CTO is not the biggest hacker in the world. He's not the code generating whiz. Typically, hacker is somebody who is educated enough, who understands code enough, but who can also talk. You know, there's people who can't talk. They sit in a corner and they do great code, but they are not CTOs typically. The CTO of a company is somebody who understands the market, understands the customer, and can, in technological, visionary terms, describe how the world will look like in 3 years when the product is ready, or so forth. So, number one sales guy in a startup company. I had luxury of having one, CTO.
I thought it was the CEO.
Well, typically in Finland, actually the CEO is really the CTO.
I know. It should be called CEO.
Yeah. And then yeah, exactly. But anyway, so typically in Finnish startups, the CTO is wears the title of CEO. And actual CEO is a different job. From 0 to 1 million you can do it, probably, but then you need to have a specialized guy to, you know, the growth phase. It's 2 different jobs. CTO or CEO, they need to be thinking with their feet when they're adapting the product and fly to the first lead customer. You can't put sales to do that. So strategic marketing, positioning, channels, things like that. Product management is actually, product marketing is important because that's features, that's how the product looks like. Product management, and these are American definitions, that's the process how you're yanking out products. So product marketing sits on the marketing, product management sits typically in an R&D organization. There's different names for that, but that's the typical best way to do it. They run a project, a product project, or they run a process where you yank out the products. Marcom, that's another thing which happens is that people confuse marketing communications, so a marketing person with a strategic marketing person. So Marcom or marketing person is a specialist who creates messaging and deploys messaging around the world in different places. That person is not necessarily capable of describing the product or the value proposition for the product. If somebody does it in almost perfect terms, then they can finalize it, but it's a very different job. So don't confuse that. And these are sales support functions, all these. And the last one is sales. And sales to me is a process. Once you have something which you can repeat, you can structure sales, you can hire a sales guy. And another thing is very few people are very good salespeople and very, very good sales managers at the same time. It's two different professions. Managing a sales organization is a sort of a sergeant type of a job, where you keep machine going. You don't necessarily see customers at all in some organizations. Then there's account managers, salespeople, strategic account managers, whatever you call it, but those are the actual sales professionals who are customer-facing people. So very important to do. Typically what happens is that you hire a sales guy too early, and then he can't make sales because he can't do repeatable sales because there's no product. And once then, if the guy is successful and you start to generate revenues, then you promote this guy, successful sales guy, to a sales manager. And he should manage sort of other guys, but he can't do that because he likes to go selling. Typically the sales guys, they make more money. And it's a very valuable job in the US. Quota carrying sales guy. That's a very important job, top job.
Top sales guy is the most important guy in the company, right?
Yeah. Another way to look at the sort of the customer need, that's a little bit software oriented, but you have to have platform is for me, there's a holy grail. You develop a platform and then you sell it to everybody. Actually, a platform must be verticalized. That's the only way you can solve a customer. You can start. It's great if you have a technology platform, whatever profession, whatever domain, but you have to hide it in early stages of the company. You have to be very specific what you are offering, whoever it is, whatever the customer is. Okay, and everybody, I'm not a big preacher of this stuff, Jeffrey Moore, but I browse through the book at least once a year. And every time it's about, whatever, more than 10 years old. And in 99, 2000, when this was sort of a booming stuff, Jeffrey Moore was booming stuff in Silicon Valley, they were consulting us. Of course, we have money to spend, so we spent a couple of $100,000 on him educating us. And so I've had a lot of FaceTime with Jeffrey. And there's a lot of these Casman consultants in Finland who are helping you to package it into this format. But don't buy that stuff. Read the book if you haven't done it, because everybody gets it. There's good examples. But he's so goddamn right on many things. And he's an English teacher by profession. So he's no technologist whatsoever. But basically, in different sort of times of the product life cycle, you have to have a very different way to address your customers. In an early phase here, when you are trying to find the visionary buyer, you have to have a visionary seller. So you have to have somebody who goes through the rock and who can sort of package the product or your technology so that it looks like a product, and you get the deal no matter what. Because if you don't get the deals, you're going to die. And early phase of the company's existence, it really doesn't, it's hard to say. I should be saying to you guys that, hey, focus on what you do. But early phase of the company development, when you're trying to get the first deal, the first deals, you have to sell wide. You have to talk with a lot of people. And it's like, in Valley they use a term, throwing mud balls on the wall and trying to see if it sticks. So basically, you're trying balls here, there, all something which can be fulfilled with the same technology, with reasonable productization effort, but you always build it so that it looks like a product. And then you try to get it, whether you can get the real price out of the customer, whether you can get the customer eyeballs to move, and whether you can buy it or sell it, the product. And once you're starting to see a pattern there, then you should focus and go through a needle hole. That's another saying. Basically, it takes a very different crowd to sell the innovator stuff and also the early adopters. During the chasm, you have to focus to the place of the vertical or the product segment, which you put all your money in one. You bet one horse, or typically I said 80%. 20% you can do other stuff, but 80% you put on one horse. And then you run with that. And that's not the time to scale the sales force yet, because it's not sure if it's repeatable. But you have to sort of overwork the founders, the people who are part of them, you know, long hours, long days, focus on exactly the right customers which you can win. But you just go through with your team. And once you go through you're starting to get traction and business within one segment. Then instead of doing that, then you start going to the next segment. Then the next thing is that you focus even more, and then you start package the product so that you can explain to quota-carrying sales guys how to sell it. So you productize your whole concept so that anybody coming out of the door can go out and sell. And then you keep honing the same segment all over and over again. Once you get to about 10 million in revenues, or 20, depends a little bit what's your sort of business and what's the perspective there. But you keep going very narrow, you hire people, you make your sales tools, your sales story better, you just focus on that one place where you go through. And after you are somewhere, you know, above 10 or 20 million, then you start branching to the next segment and next segment. 10 million, you have about 100 people. You might have a product team of about 3 to 5 people, or the marketing team. You can actually diverge and have something else on the side. But many companies, what happens in startup scene, especially here in Finland, because we have so goddamn, and Estonia is even worse because you have 1 million people there. You basically, if you want to survive inside of Estonia, you have to sell the whole Estonian population. And if you want to make a sort of a business within one product, you have to go immediately. In Finland, we're in a bad spot because we can basically we can build 1 million, 2 million business here within Finland. But then the problem is that we are starting to sell to too wide a variety of customers. So we are not focusing. But it's very important that once you get first 1,000 customers, let's say 10,000 apart, and it takes about a year probably, 2 years or something like that, in one vertical. After that, then start building the next one, or launching a sort of a next facet. You can, of course, make the existing product better. And that's when the sort of the early adopters come in, you start scaling your sales force. That's the mechanical part. The crucial part there is sort of how you find the vertical, how you package your product, how you make the first referenceable sales, which are all similar, and they love you. Do you guys know what's the Jeffrey Moore's definition of market? Have you discussed that, or do you know it by heart? Yo.
I think we discussed it here. It was the people who talk to each other.
Yeah, and they can reference one another, and that's your market, and people who are naturally sort of talking with one another and can tell the story, because customers, they always talk together, and they will talk about you most of the time. And if you are not influencing how they are talking about you, then your competition is typically, of course. But anyway, after go to early adopters and early majority, then it's sort of easy. It's just a sales force ranking, and you're pushing new products out, and then it's easy. It's different. You just have to stay innovative and stay ahead of the competition, or sell the company out. But basically there, the early part requires the bottom line. What I'm trying to see here is that you guys can't escape it. The responsibility on the sales is on you and the team. And you can't hire a sales guy to do your job. Simple. Yo.
What do you think, I mean, obviously the goal of every company is to satisfy the customers and make money, and there is 2 ways to either to list it if it's a VC-backed company, or to make an exit. So what are the kind of the stages where you can actually, where you should continue building company? Because in Finland, there's many times what I understood, you sell it too early, the company away.
Yeah, but it's also comfort zone. Not everybody wants to sort of move outside of Finland or any other country, or their families don't want to move. I told my wife, 98, that I moved to Silicon Valley in '97, then we're going to be there like 2 years, and then we come back, and it took about 8 or 9 years. Then we sailed back, bought a boat and sailed back to Finland. So, but it was, especially for my wife, it was really rough ride. So I was never home, I was flying around. I've had close to 7 million lifetime miles in 10 years, and those who've been flying, you might know that that's quite a lot. So my ass is still sore, but it's very hard to say that it's on the capabilities, appetite, on the business perspective. Some of the businesses just don't scale out of them. And some of the businesses, there's too tough competition worldwide, maybe you should limit it to Europe only. It depends very much what type of business you are. So in Veturi, we are looking for businesses where the business potential is such that there's 100 million business available and you don't have to own the 100% of them. So there's a billion euro opportunity out there. But you can't do it with them. So by design, it's kind of But does this make sense? I read the book. He also explains and characterizes every step of the way how the people look like and how they behave. And there's cases how to behave. But then, I think, if nothing else, remember this. Take responsibility. So once you start setting a sales organization, I sort of draw a quick block diagram there. Early part of the sales, it's typically CTO and CEO. Or it's the CTO who wears the title CEO. Typically there should be always 2 people in any sales team. The other one speaks English. Both of them speak English. The other one speaks money and the other one doesn't. And for example, early part of Solid, my CTO and we exchanged cards when we went to deal. So I'm technical enough to be dangerous. And I can do the same features here, but once he wanted to talk numbers. He's with Nokia right now, and basically he wanted to talk money every once in a while. But as soon as he started talking money as a CTO, he lost his credibility. It's an interesting thing. So you have to making strategic sales. There's another good book. I have a list of these books here later on. It's another good book. It's a basic in any type of B2B sales. It's Miller and Hyman, Strategic Selling. So if you haven't read it, go buy it from Amazon, wherever, and read it. It also works really well with your family life and anything. There's always similar type of behaviors happening, natural behaviors with people, and it's a very engineering oriented. So engineers get it. Good.
Same as the new strategic sales.
It's the same stuff. The new, it's just tweaked a little bit. So same guy, same story, they package it the same. So I have actually both copies, and I noticed that there's not much difference. So they just put another, they packaged it and we sold it, made some additional revenue. But anyway, so CEO, CTO, typically the most important sales guys. But once you start scaling the operation, typically underneath the CEO, you start finding a sort of a sales teams where you have an account manager. He's the guy who talks money. The next one is in Finnish peltoinsinööri, field application engineer. That's the guy who's not the technical hack, but he's the guy who understands the customer requirement and can talk the customer language. He works in teams with the account manager. Then the third person in a typical sales team, high-tech sales team, is a sales engineer. And this is the guy, who does the hacking, who can go hands-on. Field application engineer, typically, he discusses the value proposition from the business perspective of the prospective buyer. Sales engineer will tell you that yeah, this product goes well with this and these acronyms, and it sits in this part of the infrastructure. You deploy it in this and this structure. Sometimes these two guys can be one guy, but typically if you're trying to scale the operation, you have two of these roles. And then it depends on how difficult the product is to sell. whether there's multiple account managers for a one FAE and one SE. With Solid, we have one-to-one relationship, a account manager and FAE, plus then we had for the whole sales force, we had sort of a 1-to-7 ratio, 7 sales guys and 1 sales engineer, because there was less use for them. In some other businesses, it's can be sort of 4 sales guys can be furnished with 1 field application engineer. So it depends very much on the business, but you have to roll it. It's a role play. And once you engage to your customer, it's also a role play. So you figure out who does what and who talks what. It's a little bit like playing chess. You try to typically techies, they can get all the information about the account, whether they are buying, whether they are not buying, what are the objections, how you should tweak them, how is the pricing expected to be, and so forth. I can't get it if I'm a sales guy, but the account, the FAEs, they are typically the guys who sit in the bars together with customers, and over the beer they get the information. So very important to have in this type of area different roles. But then when you engage into a larger sales cycle for a small company, if this is a company with 15 people in size and you're making your first $1 million deal, or €1 million deal, then you have to orchestrate everything. You have to bring in people from business development probably, you have to bring people with the support organization, from the PS or professional services group. You have to give the whole gamut. You have to look much bigger than you are. You have to be able to sort of tell, yes, we can handle you, Mr. Customer. Whatever happens, we handle the situation. And we have these professional people. If we don't have enough, we hire. But anyway, it's a team effort. And typically, the one who calls the shots always is the one who's responsible for the account. For example, within Solid, once I didn't have a direct responsibility over any account, for example, HP, which was our big customer. We had a strategic account manager who was responsible for all business, HP business for us worldwide. And basically, he was my boss. If he wanted to meet somewhere, he told me that, hey, how's your travel schedule? We need to have you in Fort Collins, or you need to go to Beverly or somewhere, because we have these and these people you need to meet, and this is the agenda you need to talk. So I was a resource for him. He was accountable, and he was the boss. Of course, I can go and step over him, but that's if you have a seasoned professional guy. These are the guys who make $500,000 to $1 million a year. And they, their split is 50-50, or something that takes 20%, so 80% is their commission. They're sort of running their own business with your resources. So CFO was a resource, marketing, no matter what. If we wanted to deal, anything was at his disposal. It sort of works a similar way in smaller company. When you're getting the first deal, you just have to line the whole company behind the one deal and make sure that you make it happen. Join everything. And there's no egos there. If there's a sort of, in some cases, you have to sort of structure show that people can't, how would I say, that you can be a prima donna. You have to act as a team. So nobody can sort of improvise too much. But you have to decide how you go, how you communicate. With one of our portfolio companies, we have our lead customer right now in. And yesterday morning I told Juha that we have told them that we are 20 people. We are actually 15, and we had in the morning 10 people at the office. And only 14 desks. So we had to, in the morning before the customers came, they spent 3 days, we had to bring people in from other places so that there's enough mass. We had to sort of basically furnish desks, make sure that we are bigger than we are, and there was sort of a certain type of action. For example, all veterinary folks were there the first time that we were greeting the guys. And we agreed, we had a meeting, corporate meeting, before the customers came. We gave directions who can say and what. If you talk with the customer, this is only things you're allowed to tell. Otherwise, discuss nice weather outside, but nothing else. And then there's sort of speaking rights to certain VPs that you talk with this and nothing else. These matters are your topics, nothing else. And so very organized, very tightly run. And we also had to tell the CEO that, hey, you talk only about these things and don't go out of boundaries. But we just have to make a deal. You know, it's well, we have other opportunities, but right now it's so close that we just have to execute. It's very controlled. It's a team effort, and the whole team wins if it happens. Any questions about that?
I think one question is that how you recruit the right team. That's it's easy when you have the right people.
Yeah, we probably need to go by trial and error. Teams evolve is probably the correct answer. We started our solid US operation in 98. We started recruiting early 98, and it was the heydays of web bubble. I didn't get anybody to work for the company. So we hired the first 18 people a year after half of them were gone. We fired them. And until we find the right VP sales, it took 4 guys. The average life cycle of a guy was about 7 months. Hell of expensive, and also bad for the company. But Finns do have more tolerance. In America, there's much more discipline. I think Finnish sales organizations typically would benefit from more discipline, or any sales organization.
Got it.
Ramina, do you have?
Yeah, what kind of budget did you have for this?
Raised
Ballpark.
55 million.
Yeah, but I mean, how much did you spend on the training you have to fund it like that?
It's usually once you recruit a VP level guy in Valley, it's the typically headhunting since you're a no name. It's 1/3 of the annual salary without option package.
Okay.
And it's between 20 to 25 when you are the senior techies. It's a recruiter who does the hires. It's a manager level guys, and then you pay 12 to 15% for an ongoing recruiter who's pushing you resumes, and then you have to.
You don't pay them success fee or something in the beginning, or?
Yeah, if the deal is completed. So it's expensive.
But
then again, you can do it a different way. For example, if your company is hot enough, you're operating at the right times and position the company, then there's people who want to join. And once you get over a certain type of critical mass and get momentum going, then you get people.
how would you do in a company that has 1,000 times less funding?
Then you have to work on your charms and tell the story. You can you can get advisors, you can get people who've done it, and you have to excite. The startup company is falling apart.
How often the investors bring in the team? I mean, did it happen for you that you raised funding, you moved there,
Only
and they
bad members to the team.
what?
Only bad members
Okay.
to the team. So it's typically very few investors can VC. In some cases, it's worse. Very few cases, very few VCs are actually delivering that. They can identify issues, and then the company and the founders, the management should act. You can't rely on bringing VC folks in. That's the quick and dirty way. In Finland, we have this saying, it's like peeing in the pants when it's cold outside. But anyway, so it's typically it's short-sighted because then the company evolves the wrong way. Company management, CEO, the management team should take responsibility for running the business. And once you do that and you're delivering, you're first of all managing expectations so that you're delivering what you're promising, then you can do typically whatever you can do if the pace is fast enough. Manage expectations and keep your own stand. But it's constant. Right now with our portfolio guys, Mofak and I, and Miki actually, we meet more than 10 prospective people who are looking for something new a week. So we meet with people all the time. Because I think that my job, for example, is more recruiting than a sort of anything else. Its team is the important thing. So you have to focus a lot on, but it's a sales job. Sales behavior Yeah, founders in a different category. Typically founders get the worst salaries and longest hours, and there's always loaded on the upside. That's life. If you want to do that or be entrepreneurial, then that's what you get to do. And you have to remember that one in 10 gets something out of it, and 1 in 100 gets something meaningful. In some cases, it's better than doing lotto or something like that. But anyways, I wouldn't change the ride. I made a couple during Solid. It was not a home run. It could have been a home run. We were very close on making the first Finnish Nasdaq IPO in 2002. But the market went bust. The telco market went bust, and there was no way to do that. So free fall for a year. That's another story, interesting story. But anyway, so founders, little cash. Once the company gets bigger, it's 10 million or whatever run rate, the salary differences will even up. And so typically the founders who are there with the company still, they typically are getting more on par with the general price level, because you are raising the salaries as you go about, and giving less equity, and usually it hurts the founding CEO when you're hiring first, typically British or a American VP or CEO or sales VP or whoever, and this guy makes, let's say, 7 times more money as a base salary as the founder. I'm sitting in a couple of boards where I've experienced that, how painful it is. But then you can't raise the salary of the founder that fast, or there needs to be a gradual stepping. Typical rule is that not more than 25%. Sorry.
Why not?
It's just need to be. But then again, you have to have enough in that. In Finland, for example, Finnish terms, if you have 1,000 or 2,000 salaries and you're running a company which is a million run rate, that's not fair. Maybe it should be somewhere in 3, 2.5 to 3, with some sort of a performance-based kicker. But you're a big stakeholder, so you don't want to consume the money which you can use for growing the company effectively. You don't want to use that for paying your bills. You don't have time to have any hobbies anyways. So the money is tight. Equity is good. But then again, if you have a salespeople, don't give equity for that, because they're a good sales guy. If he stays 3 years and is making his money, he is actually making much more in sales commissions as a sort of equity. Sales VP is maybe 0.5 to 0.7%, but then a sales guy is 0.1 or nothing. And cash, it's interesting because those companies who pay their sales guys best, they usually are the ones who succeed. Oracle has always been like that. Embedded category, Wind River has always been like that. The guys were making 300-400 grand a year on the average on 150 days. So it's great. So it's a great sort of a, and these guys are happy. They want to get all the stock and stuff, but then you have to just convince them that, hey, think again. This is how it works. We will give you a 50-50 split, and there's no ceiling. I had a sales guy who was responsible for the HCP account. He was 27-year-old guy out of Seattle. And out of the blue, he came with this $1.8 million deal. And I promised him 10% of the sales on his quota on new sales. So I got a check, $180,000 from this guy. And he made another deal, worth about 90K that year on an 80K base. And it was great because I'm so happy. My Finnish investors and the Finnish organization said, oh, why the hell are you paying that guy that much? It's, my 3 years salary as a bonus. I said, hey, I'm happy to give the check to this guy because he's earned it. He brought this much stuff and it was my mistake. We didn't sort of tail it down, but at the same time, the account grew a lot. Biggest deal so far, one single check. And then basically the guy, you should have seen how he was running. He spent the money on a new house, you know, he bought a Porsche and sort of a lot of stuff. He just spent the money and he was ready to get more. He was running actually the impact what happened to the rest of the organization was similar. Because all the sales guys went, hey, this young fart can do that, I can do it too. So this can be, so it was a moral booster to keep the check on. I can't make that good pep talks or hire people. It was best thing ever happened inside of the sales organization to compensate well. So I'm always, when I'm looking at a sales guy, trying to figure out what sort of cars they are driving, what are their habits, do they like good wine, cigars, fast cars, and how much credit cards they use, and you know, what sort of a house debt they have, and so forth. But there's enough motivation to run. Because if there's no motivation, then you don't run fast enough. Very simple. But compensate well. FAE sales engineer compensation is typical. The split is 80-20 or 70-20, 30. So it's a little bit longer term. You want to keep these guys because they know the business better than the sales guys. Sales guys you can change. And it sort of was interesting because the best sales guys we had within Solid were guys who didn't understand damn thing about selling, damn thing about the product. They just talked well and they managed the relationship beautifully. And once you set up compensation, commission plans, you know, measurable targets. People talk about NPOs and ROAS and things like that. And with sales, always something that you can measure. And the best is revenue, or it's number of deals, or number of something. If you don't know how you price the deal, then you set up that we need to have these customers. And you get, for example, $1,000 for each customer. Or if you have a sort of, you can limit the size of the customers or something like that. But always so that you can count it. And very simple sort of Excel sheet that where the guy can sort of put 5 or 6 and he sees immediately how much money I'm going to make. Because good guys, they simulate it once a week, every Friday night or Saturday night. They go, how much money did I make this week? And document. That's another thing many guys fail to do is that you don't write a contract and then you don't execute it sort of early enough. Typically, year starts in January and you still don't have a contract, so commission plans made in April or something like that. And half of the year is already gone. And you have to negotiate retrospective. Or if you have a good sales guy, you know, experienced guy, he's hiding deals from you because he wants to get a sort of a lower, better commission rate or lower revenue. So be prompt on those and document. And then if things change, you change. You know, it has to be positive. A good sales guy needs to sort of live in a positive smile on his face, and, you know, then he's at his best. If he's disgruntled, fire him immediately, because it doesn't just pay. No tolerance of low performance. Good American sales organization, once you have a, you know, let's say 20 people in a sales organization, they typically fire, depends on the culture, one or two a year or one a quarter, the lowest performer. Once you set that up as a sort of a standard procedure, then, for example, Cisco does that, has been doing it ever since I heard the first time. HP is more tolerant. But yeah, that's what we talked about. So, execution. At the end, this is an execution game. There's a list of the books. I mentioned some of those. I'll give you the slides, so there's nothing so you can distribute. Tactical sales, then there's a strategic selling, political power-based selling. It depends very much what's your market domain. Strategic selling works really well within family, for example. You have to find the idea. For your spouse, you have to find the sort of reasons why things are happening and which way. 5 minutes with Vito is also a very good sort of how to work at senior level, how to get access to those. This is when you're making a large B2C or B2B deals. Professional service, that's another thing. Client relationship management. It's another sort of a domain. And then differentiate more. But I recommend to start with Crossing the Chasm. How many of you guys have read it? Shame on you, hey. Come on. Yeah, it's absolutely. Go buy it today. Read it. And then once you read it,
one copy tomorrow with me, if I remember.
Yeah, and once you read it, then go into Tornado Book, but you are not there yet for a couple of years. And I think the crucial thing is that the selling is it's similar whatever you sell. The principles don't change. The domain time might change, but the people, it's always people who do business. Every time. Was it what you wanted? Because I think that the mechanics side, you read from the books. It takes you one book a night. I'm not a big reader but anymore, but I've read all of those and they've been very useful. Questions? Comments? Bullshit?
I think it.
Yep.
Go for it.
The problem is, as I see it here, that okay, you had a very big business actually, and I think most of us here don't see that big business yet. It's maybe in the future, but let's say for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, but it's mindset. You know, right now with Veturi, we work with startup companies, you know, pre-revenue companies. We go out and we talk with customers. We try to identify what's the actual revenue opportunity, a market opportunity, and what's the product. And basically then we build the case. And it can be smaller deals, but then you have to do a hell of a lot of them. Or it can be sort of bigger deals when you do less of them. But don't fool yourself, it's the same mechanics apply. It doesn't change.
I think it was extremely helpful. Something they realized that even though some of us are doing B2C services, most of the sales is actually B2B, and the money comes from B2B deals. And the other thing is that if you scale enough, fast enough, it's like in 1 year, 2 year time, you have to set up your sales organization. So it's not that much. I mean, yes, it is, but it shouldn't be that far away.
It applies the same thing if you have a B2B2C. So the B there is actually a distribution channel. You have to do exactly the same sales pitch, create the value proposition. Why should they be the channel for you, for example? It doesn't differ.
I'm with you on the thing that it's a mindset thing. I think you know that people think a certain way of sales, what sales is and what it isn't, and then they think that okay, sales is not for us, and then they exclude themselves out of the sales just because they have a misconception of what sales is.
So everyday life is selling in a form, or it's business development. So you're always influencing people.
It's like most people associate marketing with marketing communication.
Yeah.
Although I think it's more critical is strategic marketing.
Yeah, strategic marketing and product marketing. That's at this stage more important. You don't want to tell the whole world what you have until you know exactly what you have, because you have only one moment to lose. So you better lose it or keep it.